to Northern Powerhouses, our business success story series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders, their backgrounds, their successes and challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this afternoon, I'm really delighted that we've got with us Simon Hartley, who's the founder at Be World Class. So Simon, firstly, welcome and thanks so much for spending a bit of time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and Be World Class and let us know how you help people, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. My background is sports psychology. So traditionally helping sports teams and athletes to get their mental game right, their mindset, teamwork, leadership around their performance right. And many years ago, I sort of figured out that sports psychology is a complete misnomer. Really, this stuff is human psychology. Yes. So if it works in sports, it works in the rest of life. So it works in business, it'll work in education, in charities, in healthcare, in the military, you name it. So I started applying the stuff that I used to call sports psychology into lots of other fields. And remarkably, it kind of works. But also my real passion, my interest, I guess, for many, many years, my curiosity has always been around world-class performance. Having worked with Olympians and worked with world champions and world record holders, I was really interested to understand what differentiates the world's best and whether, for example, if we took world-class performers, individual performers in any field in life, would we find the same sort of characteristics as we do in sport? So I've been studying world-class individuals, world-class teams, leaders, organizations to figure out what makes them great, and more specifically, what we can learn from them and how can we adopt those principles and, embed them into our own performance.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And is this sort of as a boy growing up, is this the sort of thing you envisage yourself doing?
No, as a lad, I like most lads, I wanted to be a professional footballer, all that sort of stuff. But actually, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly jet planes in the Navy. Wow. My dad was in the Fleet Air Arm in the Navy, and we lived in and around airfields. We used to go to air shows, and I always saw myself as a fighter pilot in the Navy. Until that is age 17, I failed my flying aptitude tests, and that was the end of that dream. so I had a quick a rethink, I guess. The thing is, because I failed my flying aptitude test, I then failed maths and physics, which I didn't take them because I wanted to study maths and physics. I took them to be a pilot. Right. And when the dream of becoming a pilot disappeared, so did my interest in maths and physics. So I flunked them completely. I got I think an E at A level. This is an E in physics and an ungraded in maths. And I didn't even know they did ungraded. I mean, that's the lowest of the low. So I flunked both of those. I had to have a rethink. And I'd always played sport. I'd been interested in sport. So I decided that I would study sport as well. So I did a retake of some A-levels. I did A-level sport studies, went on to university, studied sports science, and found myself, initially I thought I would probably be a physiologist or a biomechanist. I was quite interested in the hard sciences. But psychology just intrigued me, and from that point, every moment I could, I was studying psychology, human nature, how our mind works, etc.
Wonderful, wonderful. And as you you say you brought this into the sort of business world or even just organizational world, what are some of the biggest challenges and issues you've had to overcome?
Most of them that I find revolve around people and headspace. So it's mind work, it's teams, it's mindset, teamwork, leadership. And if you sort of combine that or expand it out into an organizational sense, it's probably what we call culture. And many of the challenges that I find at some level are related to mindset, leadership, teamwork, and culture. So I find myself working in and around those spaces a lot. And over the years, the challenges have probably changed slightly. I was talking to a business leadership group this morning. Attrition seems to be a real issue for them. So recruitment is a challenge, retention is a challenge. And when you kind of dig under the surface of both of those, leadership is one of the challenges, because if recruitment and retention and attrition are a challenge, then leadership is probably a challenge. Culture is probably a challenge too. Progressing and developing people in the organization might be one of those challenges. If you kind of look where the root cause of this stuff is, you probably again find that there's something around mindset, leadership, teamwork, culture, etc., that lies beneath our superficial challenges.
Brilliant. I'm interested to know, obviously working both the sports and the business world, what are some of the common factors you see, but and also is there any clear differences across those two different things, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I think there are lots of human characteristics that transcend business and sport. I mean, I sort of start from the principle that this is human stuff. And even if I walk into a business and I'm sharing some principles or some stories or, sort of illustrating through my experiences with the sports team, it's human stuff. It's always been human stuff, and it always will be human stuff. And if you kind of look at those base characteristics that make people successful, when I wrote a book called How to Shine years and years ago, and I spent time studying and researching the best individual performers on the planet, looking for the common characteristics in them. Some of those were athletes and sports people, but one of them was a Michelin star chef. There was a world barista champion in there, a world leading mountaineer and a polar explorer, loads of different people, special forces guys, all sorts. And when I looked at the common characteristics, they all seem to have a real passion for what they do. They care deeply about it. They're curious about it. That's their sort of foundation, as it were. But also when you look under the surface, there's some less obvious traits and characteristics in there. They very much focus on the next step, the one that's right in front of them. They absolutely know where they want to get to. That's fine, but they're not focused on the end or the destination. They're focused on the step that's right in front of them, because they fundamentally know that if they don't execute the step that they're taking well, they're never going to get to the destination. So that, they keep things simple. They focus on the next step. Interestingly, they understand what to and what not to compromise, because realistically, everybody's going to have to compromise. But the question is, where do we draw the line? What are our non-negotiables, and what could we compromise? And with a lot of them, and it probably won't surprise you to know, they're quite happy to compromise their comfort. In some cases, they'll compromise profitability, but they will not compromise on quality or standards. And that's where they absolutely draw their line. So you can kind of see that it drives their decision-making, it drives their thinking, and therefore it drives their performance. One of the other really interesting traits is the world-class performers that I've come across are not worried about failure. In fact, they know that if they're not failing, they're not pushing the envelope far enough. They're not stepping outside their comfort zone far enough. So they're perfectly happy failing. They will probably choose when to and when not to fail as well. World-class athletes don't tend to walk out on the big day in their calendar, Olympic final day or World Championship final day, and just try stuff they've never practiced. But when they're in training, absolutely they'll work that hard and practice, push the envelope in practice and try things they've never done before, and they will embrace failure, absolutely embrace failure.
I know that's a very a trait of our founder, Brad Triggers, is a very, very successful business guy, and he told me a long time ago, as far as he's concerned, he's as successful as he is because he's made more mistakes than anybody else he knows, not despite, but it was that desire to try and to stretch and to do different things, allowing for the fact that it wasn't all going to work, and being comfortable with that, I think was quite striking, because I thought, well, normally it's despite my failures I've been success, but it was because of, which I thought I think is fascinating. So what are some of the biggest things you've learned, in what you've been doing? What are some of the learnings that come out of your work that you've done so far?
I mean, there are some absolute fundamentals that I think underpin performance in most areas of life. Some of these I've learned through my own experience as well, because I'm really keen that almost like I am the guinea pig for this stuff.
Yeah.
I can't just know it. I've got to kind of really know it. I've got to have experienced it myself. So when I wanted to really understand mental toughness, I took on some really stupid challenges of my own, ones that I knew would push me to what I call the quit point. That moment when you are really tempted to throw in the towel. So I constructed a few of these over time to get myself to that quit point so that I could learn how to navigate through it. And when I got to that quit point, I noticed that there are a couple of questions you have to be able to answer. Why are you doing this? And how much do you want it, really?
Great.
And if you can answer both of those positively, the likelihood is you'll get through to the other side. And I found that, you know, as I was approaching this quit point, my mind started conjuring up all of these justifications to quit. It'll be okay, ... you know, nobody's watching, nobody will notice. One of these challenges that I constructed deliberately, it was kind of done in laps. This was a bizarre 100-mile walk thing. Every single one went past my house, of course.
Yes.
Equally, I'd told nobody that I was doing it. It wasn't on TV or YouTube or whatever, and I wasn't being sponsored. So when I was in agony, my brain said, nobody's watching, it's fine, you've done really well, you got this far, all that sort of stuff, home's just over there. And I kind of noticed that my brain was conjuring up all these reasons that it was okay to give up. Once I realized that that's what it was doing, and that when I asked myself those two big questions, why are you doing this and how much do you want it? Why am I doing it? To navigate the quit point? Well, that's where I am. So this is the very reason why I constructed the challenge, to get through this moment. How much do you want it? Well, I've been training for 15 months to do this thing. I do want this. You know, all those times where I got home, took my shoes off, my socks are red because I've, you know, got blisters that have popped and my feet are bleeding and whatever. This is how much I want it. So I can answer those. I get through to the other side. And then interestingly, on the other side, my brain kind of goes, oh, right, so you're going to continue then, are you? In that case, we better figure out how to get the pain out of the legs. So why don't you do some stretching on that gate over there? Or do you need something to drink? Are you dehydrated? Do you need to eat a banana? What is it that, and then it solves the problem for you.
Yeah.
And that lasts for a little while, and then you get another quit point. But I also noticed it's not quite as loud the second time round.
Okay.
So it's kind of the same stuff that goes on, but at a lesser volume. And after a while, your brain goes, oh, you're going to keep going, aren't you? Right, fine. Well, let's figure out how to solve this thing. And each time the intensity of the temptation reduces, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so understanding that the strength of your desire, the hunger that you've got for this thing is absolutely critical. It's going to dictate whether you get started in the first place, when you give up, if you give up, what it will take to knock you, all that sort of stuff. But I had to understand it from my own perspective, as well as knowing that that's how other people did it, because that gives me a really different kind of viewpoint on it, a different experience of it. And so when I'm working with somebody who's taking on a really tough challenge now, I don't just understand the theory or how it works for other people. I can genuinely empathize with it.
Goodness. So, may I ask what any of the other challenges that you did? I'm fascinated.
Well, there were a couple of, you know, sort of running, cycling, kayaking type things, and in this daft walking challenge and whatever. And some of those, you know, I sort of ran up to about ultramarathon distance before I destroyed my knees. Well, destroyed them even more than they were before. But the toughest challenge of the lot was writing the fictional book that you and I were chatting about over coffee the other day.
Right.
That was by far and away a harder challenge than all of the stupid physical challenges.
Oh, in what way?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, I was having written sort of 8 non-fiction books. I thought that I would have some transferable skills almost to take into writing a fictional book, but actually I learned along the way that some of the skills that you need are the opposite. So I had to unlearn the stuff that had made me a good non-fiction writer, because I need the 180-degree reverse opposite, polar opposite skill for fiction writing. So that was quite tough. But also I was starting from a point where I was an absolute novice at this thing. I mean, if you take the sort of principle of 10,000 hours to become an expert, I had 0 hours.
Yep.
So I wrote this first draft, which I sort of did some work on, tidied up, and it became a second draft. And I thought, wow, this thing's maybe quite good. I'll get some feedback. I sent it to an editor, and a week or two later, I got this email back from the editor, and the subject line on the email read, "Book feedback, brackets, brace yourself." and it started, he said, well, the good news is technically you do have a story because you have a start, middle, and an end. However, that's where your good news ends. And then he went into it, and it was a fairly lengthy email. And I had a friend sitting opposite me at the dining room table, my wife sitting next to me, and they could see my face dropping as I was reading this thing. And Caroline sort of looked at me and she said, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, oh, just the feedback from Greg, the editor. Oh, let's have a look, she said. So I passed her my phone, and she got about a paragraph in and looked at me, handed me the phone back. She said, I can't finish reading that. And then she said, you don't have to keep going. Because honestly, I mean, writing fiction is not what I do for a living. It's, doesn't pay the mortgage or anything.
Yep.
So I could give up. But I kind of tapped back into the reason I'd started writing it in the first place.
Yep.
And it wasn't to become the next J.K. Rowling, or because I thought I had this book in me or anything like that. The reason I started writing it was I wanted to help teenagers, particularly with their life challenges, the mental, emotional challenges.
Yep.
And I was thinking, I'll write a book. And almost in the same breath, my brain went, what, a non-fiction book? You think they'll read that? Seriously? I mean, that will be too boring. Nobody's picking that up and reading it. So then I thought, what if I write it into a fictional story? And I'd read years and years ago when I was working in the Olympic programs, one of the coaches of a junior squad found a little book called The Golfer and the Millionaire. And it's a story about how the golfer who's a down and out meets up with a millionaire. I'm assuming you read it because you're nodding at me.
Yes, yeah. Please go on, yeah.
And the millionaire imparts advice through this story, and the golfer sorts his mental game out and goes on to play pretty well. So I was thinking, okay, what about the golfer and the millionaire meets Harry Potter? Could I sort of combine, could I create the love child of these two books almost, so that it's explicit advice and suggestion, but it's wrapped up in a fictional story, and the story can engage people? The other bit that I hadn't fully realized is that really hasn't been done before. Not really, not often. So I got to work on it. And of course, my first few drafts were utter rubbish. At best, I would have said that second draft that Greg gave me feedback on was generously a 2 out of 10, but probably nearer a 1 out of 10. And I poured my heart and soul into it. I'd given it everything. It'd taken hours and hours. It's about 83,000 words, which I'd kind of written twice, if you know what I mean. So 160,000 odd words into it. Yeah. And it was rubbish. So it took me a long time to sort of get my head in gear. Okay, what can I do? How can I improve it? Let's pick up on some of the feedback. I'll, go again. Wrote a third, wrote a fourth, wrote a fifth. And at the end of the fifth, I'm thinking, this is it now. This is it. This is looking so much better. So I sent it to a friend of mine who's a thriller writer. And he said, yeah, some of it's all right. And at the time, actually, it was based around a dragon. The dragon was sort of the embodiment of my character's fears and self-doubts and, all of that sort of stuff, anxieties. And he said, I'm not getting the dragon. I'm really not getting it. Bit too contrived. I can see what you're trying to do with it, but I said, it's supposed to reflect the demons in his head. And he said, well, why not a demon then? Oh yeah, that's a good idea. So I completely tore it apart, because the realization I had at the time is, let's say this is a 5 out of 10 now, not a 1 or a 2 out of 10. You can't tweak it from a 5 out of 10 to a publishable quality of an 8.5, 9 out of 10. Yeah. It's going to take more than the massaging of an odd sentence or, finding a more descriptive word or whatever. That's not going to get it there. So tear it apart, put it all back together again. And at the time, of course, you also, from my personal experience, you get to the point of thinking, I've just run a marathon here. And all of a sudden I figured out I'm running in the wrong direction. So I'm exhausted. I'm done with this thing. I just want to publish it. I want to get it out there. I want to finish it. It's not ready. It's far from ready. So I went through another couple of years, did even more work on it, changed the dragon out, put a demon in there, new title on it, all that sort of stuff, sent it to an editor, 7 out of 10. Sent it out for some feedback. Yeah, it's all right. And again, you hit that brick wall moment of going, I don't know what more I can throw at this. I've given it absolutely everything. If I didn't keep some stuff in reserve just in case I got negative feedback, which I can just bring out and use, I've given this everything I've got. And now I'm stuck and I don't know how to make it better. So it's sort of a similar challenge, but it's equally a really different challenge. And when you were asking earlier about the difference between sort of sport and business, one of those things in sport that you can potentially do if you're stuck is go lift some more weights, go for another run, go and kick some more balls or whatever, or hit some more balls off the tee if you're a golfer or whatever. That can be the solution. In business, it's very rarely the solution. You can't just go and lift some more weights. Usually there's a problem in front of you, whether it's, how do we get more customers, whether it's a marketing, customer acquisition thing, or whether it's a staff engagement thing, whatever. You can't just pull out a tactic and do more of it, or lift heavier weights or whatever. You've got to think your way around this problem. So, one of those things that I continually came across was, you've hit a brick wall, you've hit a dead end. Go on, then get back up from this. What are you going to do next? You've given it everything. And that's probably why it was the hardest challenge. It's taken me 7 years to write it, from sort of first idea, driving up the A19 towards Sunderland, thinking, oh yeah, I could write a fictional book, to actually getting the finished thing in a cover, arriving on the doorstep, in cardboard boxes.
Brilliant. And remind us the title of the book. You said you changed it a couple of times. Yeah,
it ended up, the final title was Silence Your Demons.
Brilliant.
And hopefully it does what it says on the tin kind of thing. It helps you silence the demons in your head, helps us silence the demons in our head.
Wonderful. And just to recap, the two things that you asked when you're at your end, there was, do I want it enough? And
so why are you doing this, and how much do you want it?
How much do you want it? Brilliant.
Yeah. And it forces you to tap right back into that reason why. And if you haven't got a really strong reason to do something, if it's only a would be nice if ... then the likelihood is not going to happen.
It's interesting, actually. Well, for me, it's interesting. When I start an engagement with a client from a business coaching perspective, we do what we call an alignment, and the alignment is aligning the business goals to the personal goals of its owners. Because most business goals and plans are basically to get to the next level. So when I hear somebody say, I want the business to get to 1 million or 5 million or 10 million or 20 million, I know they haven't got a particular reason why, because that's just a number. Now, if they're just on, if the most important thing is a number, that might be true of 0.11% of a population. But most of them don't know, because if they knew what it was going to give them, it would be 1.75 or 5.23 or 4.62. And so getting really into the emotional drivers of why what the endpoint is, and why, because of what it will deliver to them and their family and the people around them, is tapping into, hopefully, or needs to tap into, why do I want it so much? And I think that's fascinating from my perspective, of making sure, which you try to do, is that everything we talk about relates back to those key drivers that they have.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the reflections that I've made over the years, a goal is very, very different than a purpose or a reason. And a goal is just a desire, a desired end state. And you're right. I mean, if you look at most goals, targets in any walk of life, they tend to end in a zero. I want to make 1 million because it's a round number. And you kind of think, well, how much really do you want that? How important is that to you, really? I have a bizarre conversation often with junior Olympic squads or junior international squads. And I will stand there in front of them and I'll say to them, hands up if you want to be a world champion or a world record holder. And as you can imagine, all the hands go up. And then I say something that sounds really bizarre to them, which is, I don't believe you. And they go, what? I mean, like if I come in as a sports psych, they're expecting me to, pump them up, not bring them down. And they look at me all confused. And so I say, well, do you want to know why I don't believe you? Yeah, I do want to know why. Yeah. Well, it's because I watched you lot training this morning and you don't look like world champions to me. And then we kind of dig into it. And as always, with a group of 14-year-olds, plowing up and down a swimming pool, for example, you'll just spot things that say you don't really want it. Yeah. And so I'd say things like, well, when the coach was giving you some feedback, you were talking to your mate. And when the coach said go 100%, you sort of went 85. And when the coach said work all the way into the wall, you cruised the last 10 meters. And then when you got out the pool, you were eating a bag of Haribo and you were drinking a Diet Coke and whatever. So you don't really want it, do you? It's one of those, it would be lovely if, it'd be lovely if I could just keep doing the stuff I'm doing right now and become a world champion. If I didn't have to push myself too hard, if I didn't have to discipline myself, if I didn't have to overcome all the hurdles, whatever, I'd love it if the world championship just arrived. And I have the same conversation often with startup entrepreneurs. How much do you want to be a millionaire? Oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. Okay. So what's the solution? Oh, I might buy a lottery ticket. You don't want it that much, really, do you? Yeah. Because if we did want it, we'd be making different choices, right? We'd be pushing ourselves a bit harder, or scrutinizing what we did a little bit more, or persisting a little bit longer.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's really fascinating. It's made me think of a few situations and a few people. Yeah. Brilliant. So I think you're aware we're a business coaching organization. I'm keen to know who the best coaches you've ever worked with in any form of sport, business, life.
So a lot of the best sports coaches that I've ever worked with. So I worked with a cricket coach for quite a few years. It's an Australian guy who's coaching South Australia now. One of the reasons he was a really great coach is because his central philosophy was we coach people first and cricket second. And he really, really understood that number one thing you need to do is connect with the person, understand the person, help the person to develop. And when we do that, the cricket stuff will kind of sort itself out. But if I walk in here and think that my job is to impart technical knowledge on how you bowl a ball or hit a ball or whatever, I've missed the central point here. And the very, very best sports coaches that I know, I'm working with a rugby coach right now who's got a very, very similar philosophy, and really understands that we need to meet people where they are as well. I mean, he's coaching a team who they've got a really, really unique culture, and you can't just go in and sort of impart or sort of copy and paste Western ways of doing things onto this team. They're incredibly successful. They have been for years. They've got Olympic gold medals behind them, etc. But you can't just walk in and say, that's the way we do things in the West, so we're going to do that here. You have to start with who they are, where they are. And yes, you can start kind of working towards a few things that might help them. But equally, you might look at some of the stuff that we do classically in the UK, Europe, America, and think maybe we haven't got it right on every level. One of the things I spent a couple of days with them when they were in the UK a few weeks ago, and I was thinking, many UK coaches are sort of obsessed with the idea that we have to work on the 1%, and that's sort of fine as long as we haven't missed the 50%. And he's started to realize that actually it would be very easy to sacrifice the 50% or miss it completely in an attempt to try and hone down on the 1%.
Interesting. That's fascinating. I mean, I would have thought I would have thought that the 50% had already been, I mean, the main reason you go for the 1% is because the 50% have been sorted, but is sometimes that's just not the case. It's just there are so many significant rooms for improvement.
And I think some people don't really understand what drives the performance. They sort of think they understand what drives the performance, but again, they're looking at it in a very, very blinkered way. So classically in sport, how do we drive the performance here? Oh, maybe we could tighten up on nutrition and performance analysis and strength and conditioning work and whatever. That's where the 1% will come from.
Yep.
But actually, if we think about it, what is it that really, really allows this team to perform exceptionally well? Maybe when they're having fun.
Yeah.
Oh, we haven't got a metric around that.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But let's say we had a funometer over here.
Yep.
How closely would our funometer correlate to performance on the field?
Yeah.
To points we score and fewer points that we concede. And then maybe we need to look at how much the lads are laughing and how much they're kind of how good the banter is and all that sort of stuff. Maybe that's a good indication of how they're going to perform on the field.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely the same in business. So many people are scrutinizing metrics that actually have no relationship to our performance whatsoever, or the barest relationship at best, and they've missed the huge things that really will drive performance.
Yeah. So that very much makes sense about various things. I know I'm a lot of business metrics, a lot of results-based metric. What's the outcome? And that we often find people aren't measuring what have we done to achieve the outcome. So what's upstream, and typically the things that are upstream are more controllable than the output. The end goal is a combination of inputs, and therefore if you don't measure the inputs and look to improve them, then the output is a bit irrelevant in many ways, or is unlikely to change. Goodness. So through the work you've done, what have you learned about yourself?
I mean, a lot. You can imagine the amount I've learned just from writing one book. What I tend to do, I reflect a lot. It was years and years and years ago, I was asked for the one piece of advice that I would give. And again, based on my own experience, the advice is take your own advice. Because I believe if we all took our own advice, we'd all be amazing. Because in doing so, what you end up doing is converting what you know into what you do.
Yep.
And there's usually a huge gap for people between what they know and what they actually do. So I guess what I've been really keen over time to do is make sure I do that as much as possible. Hence why I engage in stupid challenges and push myself outside of my comfort zone so often. It's to close that gap between knowing and doing. And my understanding is that the gap between knowing and doing is being.
Yes.
So if we want to actually convert what we know into what we do, it's through characteristics often and identity. So, it's because we're more persistent, we're more resilient, we're more courageous, those sorts of characteristics, or because we've managed to build a solid sense of self-worth and some self-belief, and therefore we can transcend between knowing and doing. So that's really been the focus for me. It's been reflecting on where I am, who I am, more importantly, and who I want to be, and making sure I keep closing the gap towards who I want to be. Reflecting on how I've responded in situations and thinking, was that the way I wanted to respond in that situation? How can I respond more like the response that I want?
Yes.
And it's a constant process, constant sort of reflective observational process. And usually works best, I've found, without the judgment.
Okay, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So to understand the difference between sort of evaluation and judgment usually comes with a good, bad, right, wrong.
Yes.
Judgment with it. So for example, when I got the feedback from my book, there's a big difference between viewing it as a 1 out of 10 and viewing it as garbage. Garbage is the judgment. 1 out of 10 is the evaluation. And 1 out of 10 says there's some good stuff in here that you're going to keep, like you had a start, middle, and end. Okay. But there's probably a lot that you need to improve on. So how do we get it from 1 out of 10 to 2 out of 10, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4, from 4 to 5, from 5 to 6? That's a very different mental process than this is utter garbage. How do I make it good? Because actually, if I was asking that question, my mind would go, I have no idea whatsoever. I don't think I can do it.
That makes absolute sense. That's really interesting.
And of course, there's an emotional impact with it as well. If you're judging or self-judging,
Yeah.
It usually comes with more of an emotional sting than if you were evaluating.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And those emotive words you said, so the right, wrongs, good, bad. I mean, they really do hit very hard, don't they? Or they can hit very hard. Whereas, as you say, it's a 1 out of 10. Well, one of the things we often say in what we do is, oh, great, lots of room for improvement. So, you know, it's a positive way at looking at what could be considered through judgment a negative result. It could just be right at the first rung. Goodness. So I can talk about this all day, but what's next for you? What's the future hold?
So we obviously want to get this book into as many hands as possible. So yes, I'm sort of literally standing here staring at about 900 books sitting on my shelves and thinking these need to be in the world, not in my office. So that's one of my big focuses. We've also got a podcast that we've started to put together, the Podium podcast. We've recorded our first couple of episodes. They should be out end of June, beginning of July, I suspect. And one of our central questions really is, lots of people talk about sort of athletic mindset and how performance athletic mindset translates into business. And I thought, well, what better way to explore that subject than take athletes who have either they have retired or they're in that transition and see how they apply their own performance mindset in a different environment. If they were setting up a business, running a business, or whatever. So we've found loads of wonderful, I mean, great athletes, more past than present. You know, most of them have retired, and we're exploring, you know, how does this work? What works? What doesn't work? So that's on its way, and we've got loads of other projects on the go. We've got a conference next February. I think we've got about 5 tickets left. It's at Lord's Cricket Ground, and again, same subject, you know, about elite thinking and how elite thinking sort of transcend into business. And we've got world number ones, we've got Olympic champions, we've got world record breakers, and a blend of some athletes, some coaches, some leaders, even a couple of sports psychs who really genuinely are and have been at the top of the world, the very top of the world in their sport, and we're looking at the principles that made them great that also work in other environments, you know, primarily business, but not purely business.
Brilliant. That sounds fascinating. That's towards the end of this year, did you say? That's
February next year, 9th of February.
Brilliant. Yeah. Sounds exciting.
Yeah, at my favourite sports venue, I think. Lord's. I think it probably is my favourite stadium.
It's very impressive, isn't it? I mean, I've been lucky enough to be a few times, but also the museum's quite fascinating. But I in my business life, I actually gave a presentation in that was the new media centre, the Big Mouth. And it's not. I mean, you may have done the same. It's nuts because it's so steep. It was just like it's sort of vertigo inducing. We're trying to present some stuff. It was quite. It felt quite impressive to do, but it wasn't really a good place to do a presentation, in my opinion.
It's a wonderful backdrop.
Yes, absolutely. Really. Mind you, we're obviously very proud of the fact in Headingley we've got. I must be the only international sports stadium that's got a view into both a cricket and a rugby pitch at the same time. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah, that's a lovely room. That
it's really is wonderful, isn't it? It's a great place to be. So sorry, that's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm really interested in obviously in all these things that you've learned, and especially that how you're bringing the learning and establishing the links between sports and business. What from a performance perspective, what would you say to anyone that was thinking of going to business right now?
I think, you know, if you get the foundations right, and that really comes from understanding how, I think I will call it, your real passion aligns with a valuable need in the world. I looked at characteristics of the very best entrepreneurs, and I noticed that the foundational characteristic was that they were solving a hugely valuable problem in the world that they were deeply passionate about.
Yes.
And I would say, you know, if you understand that foundation, if you get that foundation in place, then you've got something solid to work from. And it's very different than the way that lots of people approach business, especially if they've had a career or they've got a skill set in something. They, instead of saying, you know, what's the valuable problem in the world and, you know, do I care passionately about solving it? They think, what skills have I got and how can I sell them?
Yeah.
And that's a really, really different thought process.
Yeah.
So I'd say, you know, if you can take that little step back and set the firm foundation, valuable problem in the world that you care passionately about solving, you've got a real chance.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I think that's, really valuable feedback. And I guess, interestingly enough, a lot of people that I meet have, in fact, someone I spoke to this morning said they got into business by accident, which I guess, you know, is the challenge, isn't it? Is that they may not be in that place of exactly knowing that. But I think, I guess it's finding it, isn't it? What is it that is most important to us that will drive us forward? But without it, it's going to be very difficult. It becomes a very, I guess you hit that, forgive me your language, but the give up point far easier.
Yeah.
If you don't have that real purpose and that passion about what you do.
Yeah, and it's going to be a little bit like, as my friend would describe it, trying to push rope uphill. If you don't have a valuable problem in the world, because then you're trying to convince somebody to buy your stuff because you want them to buy it, rather than creating that sort of, for want of a better phrase, no-brainer where everyone can see why they want to buy it, because it's perfectly obvious why you'd want to buy it, because the thing's good and it's valuable and it solves my problem. And
no, that makes absolute sense. Well, Simon, thank you so much. You've been very, very fascinating and interesting, and it'd be great maybe to come back and touch on some of the subjects maybe moving forward at some point. I want to do a bit more myself on you know, talking to sports people, and so obviously you've got a foot in both camps. But thank you so much for your time today, and so people, for the new book, but also in general, if they'd like to get in touch with you about what you do, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, hopefully, if you were to Google search Simon Hartley Be World Class, you'd find me fairly quickly. Also, I'm on LinkedIn. The Twitter handle is at World Class Simon, and the website is B for Bravo, E for Echo, -world-class.com.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Simon, and we're good to catch up again soon.
Fantastic. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.